HOA president. Smiled while they chained my barn. She forgot security cameras. Record more than video. The morning I found heavy chains wrapped around my own barn doors. I honestly thought it had to be some kind of mistake. But the woman standing there with an HOA notice looked me straight in the eye and said my tractor was no longer inside my property. I didn't argue. I didn't cut the chain. Instead, I grabbed one old leather folder my grandfather told me never to throw away. What happened after that uncovered fake surveys, hidden recordings, and one question in a county hearing that changed everything. Stay with me until the end, because this story proves that the quietest evidence can be stronger than the loudest accusation. And before we get started, if you enjoy stories about everyday Americans standing their ground with patience, truth, and the law, not anger or revenge, take a second to subscribe. There are plenty more HOA battles, ranch stories, and hard-earned lessons still to come. Caleb Foster had spent enough years working both ranch land and county roads to know that trouble usually announced itself long before it arrived. A broken fence left fresh splinters. A sick horse stopped eating. A dishonest man talked louder than everyone else in the room. That Tuesday morning, however, trouble greeted him in complete silence. He pulled his dusty pickup beside the weathered red barn that had stood on the Foster Ranch since his grandfather raised it with neighbors more than 50 years earlier. Every board, every nail, every beam carried family history. Inside waited the restored John Deere tractor his grandfather had bought second-hand decades ago. The same machine Caleb planned to use before the afternoon heat settled across the Wyoming hayfields. He stepped out, coffee still warm in his hand, then stopped so suddenly that it splashed across his boots. A thick steel chain wrapped around both barn doors. A heavy industrial padlock secured it tightly. Someone had locked the barn from the outside. Caleb stared for several seconds without moving. He reached out, grabbed the chain, and gave it a firm pull. It didn't budge. His eyes shifted lower. Fresh scrape marks crossed the gravel where a truck had recently backed up to the entrance. Tire tracks cut through the dirt, still sharp enough that last night's dew hadn't softened their edges. Then he noticed the sign. It had been bolted directly onto one of the fence posts bordering his driveway. HOA Maintenance Access Corridor. Authorized personnel. Only Caleb read the words twice. Then a third time. The sign wasn't homemade. It carried the polished logo of the Hollow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. His ranch wasn't part of Hollow Creek Estates. It never had been. He slowly looked east across the fence line toward the subdivision that had appeared 5 years earlier, where open grazing land once stretched to the county road. Several residents stood near the sidewalk, pretending to walk their dogs while openly watching him. The moment Caleb looked their way, most lowered their eyes. Not because they felt guilty, because they already knew something he didn't. A familiar voice interrupted the silence. "I was wondering how long it'd take you to notice." Caleb turned. Diane Holloway stood beside the white vinyl fence separating the subdivision from his pasture. Even at 8 in the morning, she looked prepared for an HOA board meeting, wearing pressed slacks, sunglasses, and a bright blue jacket despite the warming sun. She folded her arms with practiced confidence. "You can't seriously think this is funny," Caleb said evenly. "I think it's necessary." His eyes drifted back toward the chain. "You locked my barn. I secured a structure that's interfering with community property." Caleb looked back at her. "My barn is on my ranch." She smiled politely. "That's your opinion." For several seconds, neither spoke. Wind stirred dry grass between the fence posts. Somewhere behind the barn, a meadowlark called once before, falling silent again. Finally, Caleb asked, "Who gave you permission?" "The board." "My question wasn't about your board." Diane's smile never changed. "Our survey shows this building sits inside a planned maintenance corridor that serves the neighborhood. Caleb almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he simply asked, "Since when?" "Since our updated property review. My family's deed predates your subdivision by 70 years. Things change." "No," Caleb replied quietly. "Paperwork doesn't." She took a step closer to the fence. "You've ignored every reasonable request this association has made. The equipment parked in that barn blocks future access. Until everything gets sorted out, the tractor stays where it is. It's my tractor. It will still be your tractor tomorrow, if I can't reach it, if you cooperate." Behind Diane, Tyler Holloway leaned casually against an HOA maintenance truck, sipping coffee as though this entire conversation were morning entertainment. "Looks pretty secure," Tyler called. "Guess hay can wait." A few residents chuckled nervously. Caleb didn't even glance toward him. His attention stayed fixed on Diane. "If I cut that chain, I'd advise against damaging HOA property." Caleb looked down at the chain once more. HOA property, wrapped around his family's barn. He reached into his pocket. Every person watching seemed to expect him to pull out bolt cutters, or maybe his deputy badge. Instead, he removed only his phone. He took photographs. The chain, the lock, the warning sign, the tire tracks. Every angle, every detail. Tyler frowned. "Aren't you going to do something?" "I already am." Diane tilted her head. "You planning to complain?" Caleb slid the phone back into his pocket. "No." He walked calmly back toward his pickup. The spectators exchanged confused looks. One elderly couple whispered to each other. Tyler laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Guess that's it." Diane watched Caleb climb into the truck. "No locksmith?" she called after him. "No." "No argument?" Caleb started the engine. Still no anger. Still no raised voice. He rolled slowly down the ranch driveway without another word. As the pickup disappeared beyond the cottonwoods lining the county road, Diane allowed herself a satisfied smile. She believed she'd just won the first battle. None of them noticed that Caleb hadn't driven toward town. He had taken the road leading directly to the oldest building in the county, where property records had been kept for more than a century. And inside his truck, resting on the passenger seat, lay a worn leather folder his grandfather had once labeled, in careful handwriting, "Land deeds, never throw away." Caleb drove straight past the sheriff's office. He ignored the hardware store where anyone else would have stopped to buy bolt cutters. He passed the feed supply, the diner, and every familiar storefront until he reached the old county records building, a brick structure that had survived longer than most of the ranches surrounding it. If someone wanted to rewrite the boundaries of his family's land, this was where the truth would either survive or disappear. Inside, County Clerk Melissa Granger looked up from a stack of survey filings. "Morning, Caleb. Need access to every recorded survey tied to the Foster Ranch." She frowned. "Everything?" "Everything." Without asking another question, she disappeared into the archives. An hour later, Caleb sat surrounded by yellowed plats, tax maps, easement filings, and property transfer summaries dating back to the 1950s. One by one, he compared each legal description against the copies inside his grandfather's folder. The measurements matched. The bearings matched. The iron corner markers referenced in the oldest survey matched. Nothing had changed, which meant someone else's paperwork had. Caleb photographed every document before requesting certified copies. "If this is headed where I think it is," Melissa said quietly, "you'll want the county seal on every page." "I was hoping you'd say that." Before leaving, he asked one final question. "Has anyone requested records on my property recently?" Melissa hesitated. "About 3 weeks ago, who?" "Hollow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." Caleb nodded once. Did they request copies? They requested amendments. The word settled heavily between them. Amendments? Melissa reached for her computer. They claimed they were correcting boundary references connected to future infrastructure planning. Were they approved? No. She turned the monitor toward him. Every amendment had been marked. Pending. No county authorization. Caleb thanked her and left without another word. Outside, he unfolded one of the certified plats across the hood of his pickup. The legal boundary placed his barn nearly 80 yards inside his property. There wasn't even a shared easement nearby. The HOA maintenance corridor simply didn't exist. Meanwhile, across the subdivision, Diane Holloway held an impromptu gathering outside the clubhouse. About 20 homeowners stood around folding tables while Tyler leaned proudly beside a freshly printed subdivision map mounted on an easel. As everyone can see, Diane announced confidently, the maintenance expansion has already been planned. She pointed directly toward Caleb's ranch. The equipment building is preventing safe community access. Several residents nodded uncertainly. Others exchanged uneasy looks. Emily Carter remained near the back of the crowd. She studied the enlarged map carefully. Something bothered her. She had lived on the corner lot for almost 6 years. The fence behind her backyard had never been where this new map showed it. Not once. When the meeting ended, she walked the property line on her way home. Halfway there, she stopped. Fresh wooden survey stakes stood several feet inside Caleb's pasture. They hadn't been there yesterday. The soil around them was still loose. She crouched beside one and touched the dirt. It crumbled beneath her fingers. Recently dug. Very recently. Her eyes drifted toward the tire marks leading back toward the HOA maintenance shed. She quietly took several pictures before slipping her phone back into her pocket. Late that afternoon, Caleb returned to the ranch. The chain still wrapped tightly around the barn. The warning sign remained exactly where Diane had left it. But now there were 3 additional orange survey flags fluttering beside his driveway. Tyler was hammering another stake into the ground when Caleb pulled in. "Making yourself comfortable?" Tyler asked with a grin. Caleb didn't answer. He simply looked at the new stake, then at the survey ribbon tied around it, then back toward the subdivision. "You know," Tyler continued, "once the county finishes updating everything, you might not even own this side of the barn anymore." Caleb finally spoke. "What survey company put those stakes in?" Tyler's smile faded for just a fraction of a second. "What difference does that make?" "I asked a simple question." "They're official." "That's not what I asked." Tyler shrugged. "Guess you'll find out." Caleb watched him walk away without another word. After Tyler disappeared behind the HOA maintenance building, Caleb walked to the nearest survey stake and knelt beside it. Something caught his attention. The wood was spotless. No weathering. No county identification tag. No licensed surveyor's stamp. Just plain lumber driven into freshly disturbed earth. He looked farther down the fence line. Every new stake matched. Brand new. Unmarked. Homemade. Caleb slowly stood. He pulled a small metal detector from the toolbox in his truck, a tool he normally used for locating old fence wire before plowing fields. He switched it on. As he swept the detector across the ground, several feet away from the newly planted stake, the machine emitted a sharp, steady tone. There was metal buried beneath the grass, exactly where an original survey marker should have been. Caleb stared at the spot in silence. Someone hadn't just placed new stakes. Someone had placed them beside something they hoped nobody would ever uncover. And if the original marker was still buried where it had always been, who had gone to the trouble of making the fake boundary look real? Caleb didn't dig. Not yet. Instead, he photographed the detector's display, marked the exact GPS coordinates on his phone, and stepped back. The temptation to expose the buried marker immediately was strong, but years in law enforcement had taught him one lesson above all others. Evidence loses value the moment procedure disappears. He climbed back into his pickup and drove to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Owen Brooks looked up as Caleb entered carrying the leather folder and a thick stack of certified county records. "You look like you've already solved half the case." "I don't want to." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "I want someone else to." Caleb laid everything on the desk. "The barn is mine. The county records confirm it. Someone chained it shut, posted HOA signs on my property, and planted survey stakes that don't match the county plats." Brooks listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, he slid his deputy credentials across the desk. "I need you to assign this to someone else." "You sure?" "If I touch this investigation, Diane Holloway will spend the next year claiming I used my badge to settle a personal dispute." Brooks leaned back in his chair. "She's exactly the kind who would. I won't give her the opportunity." For several moments, the sheriff studied the documents before him. Then he picked up the phone. "I want 2 deputies from the North District," he said into the receiver. "Not from Caleb's shift, and notify County Surveyor Nathan Briggs that we may need him." He hung up and looked at Caleb. "From this point forward, you're the reporting party, nothing more." Caleb nodded. "That's exactly what I wanted." Before Caleb left, Brooks asked one final question. "You still have your family's original deed?" Caleb placed a weathered envelope on the desk. "My grandfather kept telling me never to lose it." Brooks smiled faintly. "Smart man." Word spread through Hollow Creek Estates before lunchtime. 2 sheriff's vehicles had been assigned to review the complaint. Tyler laughed when he heard. So he finally called the cops. Diane remained surprisingly calm. "Good." Tyler looked confused. "Good? The more official this becomes, the better." She tapped the rolled HOA survey map resting beside her desk. "We have paperwork." "County paperwork?" "We have enough paperwork." She spoke with complete confidence, but after Tyler left the room, she quietly opened a filing cabinet and pulled out the same survey packet she had been showing residents all week. She flipped through every page. One document was missing. Her expression tightened. She searched the drawer again. Nothing. That afternoon, Deputies Aaron Mills and Lisa Moreno arrived at Caleb's ranch. Neither had ever worked directly with him. That was intentional. Caleb met them beside the chained barn. "I won't tell you what happened," he said. "I already did that in my statement." Lisa smiled. "Good. We'd rather hear it from the evidence." Together they photographed the chain, the lock, the warning signs, and every newly planted survey stake. Aaron measured the distance from the barn to the visible fence. Lisa compared those measurements against the certified county plat Caleb had provided. The numbers didn't come close. "This map says the barn sits 81 yards inside your property," Aaron said. "It does, so why would anyone move the line?" Caleb answered honestly. "I don't know." It wasn't the answer either deputy expected. Most property owners already had a theory. Caleb simply refused to guess. Across the fence, several HOA residents watched the deputies work. Emily Carter stood quietly near her mailbox. She recognized one of the survey stakes immediately. She had watched Tyler unload them from the HOA maintenance truck 2 nights earlier. At the time, she assumed the county had ordered new measurements. Now she wasn't so sure. Deputy Moreno noticed her watching. "If you've seen anything," she called politely, "you're welcome to contact us." Emily hesitated, then nodded once before walking back inside. Just before sunset, Diane marched across the subdivision entrance carrying a folder thick with HOA documents. She stopped a few feet from the deputies. I assume someone can explain why law enforcement is interfering with association business. Deputy Mills answered calmly. We're documenting a reported property dispute. This land falls under HOA authority. Do you have county documentation supporting that? She confidently handed him the glossy subdivision survey. Aaron flipped through several pages. Everything looked official, professional, stamped, color-coded. Then he reached the final page. The approval section was blank. No county seal, no recorder's signature, no filing number. When was this approved? He asked. It reflects the updated boundaries. That's not what I asked. Diane's smile weakened. It was submitted. Aaron closed the folder. I asked when it was approved. For the first time since the confrontation began. She didn't answer. Sheriff Brooks arrived minutes later. He looked at the HOA survey only briefly before turning toward Caleb. Then he asked the question that made Diane's confidence begin to crack. Caleb, where's the original county deed? Without a word, Caleb walked to his pickup and opened the passenger door. He lifted the worn leather folder his grandfather had protected for decades and carefully removed a weathered envelope. The paper inside was brittle around the edges, but every seal, signature, and handwritten notation remained perfectly clear. Sheriff Owen Brooks accepted it with both hands. You've kept this in good condition. My grandfather always said land isn't protected by fences, Caleb replied. It's protected by paperwork. Diane let out a short laugh. A deed from the 1950s doesn't control modern development. Brooks didn't respond. Instead, he unfolded the document across the hood of Caleb's truck. Deputy Lisa Moreno placed the HOA survey beside it, while Deputy Aaron Mills opened the certified county plat Caleb had obtained earlier that day. 3 maps. 3 versions of the same property. Only one could be correct. Brooks adjusted his glasses and began reading aloud, beginning at the original iron monument located on the northwest corner of Section 14. Nathan Briggs, the county surveyor, arrived just as Brooks reached the legal description. Carrying a weathered field case, Briggs listened quietly before stepping beside the truck. Mind if I see it? Brooks handed him the deed. Nathan compared every bearing and distance against the certified plat. Then he reached into his case and removed another folded document. This, he said, laying it beside the others, is the archived county survey completed before Hollow Creek Estates even existed. The measurements matched Caleb's deed exactly. Every corner, every boundary, every easement. Nathan pointed to the barn. The structure sits here. He traced the line with his finger. The legal property line is over there. His hand stopped nearly 80 yards away. Silence settled over the gathered crowd. Several homeowners leaned closer. Tyler frowned. That can't be right. Nathan looked at him. It either is or it isn't. He tapped the county survey. This was recorded 43 years ago. Then he tapped the deed. This references the same monuments. Finally, he looked at the HOA map. This one references monuments that don't exist. Diane crossed her arms. Our survey was professionally prepared. Nathan nodded calmly. I'm sure it was prepared. He paused. I didn't say it was recorded. A murmur spread through the watching residents. One man quietly asked his wife, "Does that mean the HOA map isn't official?" Nobody answered. Sheriff Brooks continued reading the legal description aloud, making certain everyone present heard every word, continuing east to the iron survey marker adjacent to the Foster equipment barn. He lowered the deed. The barn isn't near the property line. He looked directly at Diane. It's specifically referenced as part of the Foster property. Diane's confident expression finally faltered. There has to be an updated filing. Melissa Granger's voice came from behind the crowd. There isn't. Heads turned. The county clerk had arrived carrying a document case. I brought certified copies of every filing connected to this parcel. She opened the case and handed Brooks the county's official records. No amended boundary has ever been approved. She looked directly at Diane. Your association submitted requests. She paused. They were never authorized. Tyler stepped forward. So you're saying the county just ignored them? Melissa answered without emotion. I'm saying they were legally incomplete. Deputy Mills picked up the HOA survey again. Who stamped this? Diane hesitated. It came from our planning consultant. Licensed by the county? I'd have to check. You haven't checked already? She said nothing. Nathan Briggs examined the bottom corner of the HOA map. Then he frowned. This survey references benchmark marker B-17. He looked around slowly. Interesting. Brooks noticed the change in his expression. What? Nathan tapped the paper. Benchmark B-17 was removed almost 12 years ago. He looked up. No licensed surveyor would have used it. The crowd grew noticeably quieter. Emily Carter stood near the back, staring at the fake survey with growing disbelief. She remembered seeing Tyler unloading wooden stakes from the HOA truck. At the time, she assumed professionals had already measured everything. Now she wasn't sure any of it had been legitimate. Sheriff Brooks carefully folded Caleb's deed and handed it back. Keep this somewhere safe. I intend to. Brooks turned toward Deputies Mills and Moreno. Photograph every survey stake on this property. Then to Nathan. I'd like the original monuments verified. Nathan nodded. I'll begin first thing tomorrow. Finally, Brooks faced Diane. Until this investigation is complete. He glanced toward the chained barn. Those chains stay exactly where they are. Tyler smiled. Diane looked relieved. But Brooks wasn't finished. They're now evidence. The smile vanished from Tyler's face. And nobody, Brooks continued, touches them without authorization. As deputies began marking the area with evidence flags, Diane watched control slip away one careful procedure at a time. She had arrived expecting to settle a neighborhood argument. Instead, the sheriff had transformed her locked barn into the center of an official investigation. And one question now hung over every conversation in Hollow Creek Estates. If Caleb's deed was unquestionably authentic, who had created a survey convincing enough to make honest people believe his land no longer belonged to him? The answer wouldn't come from another argument. It would come from the ground itself. At sunrise the following morning, County Surveyor Nathan Briggs returned with 2 assistants carrying professional survey equipment, metal probes, and historical coordinate data pulled directly from the county archive. Deputy Lisa Moreno documented every step while Sheriff Owen Brooks observed from the edge of the pasture. Nathan stopped beside the first newly planted HOA stake. Nobody touches anything until it's photographed. Within minutes, every stake had been measured and mapped. Then Nathan looked toward Caleb. You said your detector found something over there. Caleb nodded and pointed to the exact spot he'd marked the evening before. Nathan swept his own calibrated locator across the area. The machine responded instantly. There's metal beneath us. Using a narrow probe instead of a shovel, Nathan carefully loosened only enough soil to expose the top of a rusted iron monument. He brushed away decades of packed dirt. Stamped into the weathered cap were 4 letters, CLS County Land Survey. Nathan smiled. There it is. Deputy Moreno photographed the marker from every angle before recording its GPS position. Nathan compared the coordinates with the county survey. They matched within less than an inch. Sheriff Brooks looked toward the freshly installed HOA stake standing nearly 12 feet away. And that one? Nathan didn't hesitate. It has no legal value whatsoever. A murmur spread through the residents gathering along the fence. Some had arrived expecting another neighborhood dispute. Instead, they were watching professional surveyors dismantle the HOA's entire claim, one measurement at a time. Nathan continued along the fence line. Each buried monument appeared exactly where Caleb's grandfather's deed said it should. Each new wooden stake stood several feet away from the authentic marker. Not one matched. By mid-morning, Nathan folded his field notebook. This wasn't a surveying mistake. Brooks looked up. What was it? Someone ignored every original monument. He glanced back toward the subdivision. You don't accidentally do that. Emily Carter stood quietly behind the crowd, her phone clutched tightly in one hand. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered Tyler's truck parked near the fence 3 nights earlier. She remembered floodlights, the sound of a post driver. She remembered telling herself it wasn't her business. Now it clearly was. Deputy Moreno noticed her lingering again. If you've got something to say. Emily took a slow breath. I saw Tyler. Everyone turned toward her. He wasn't alone. Brooks stepped closer. When? 3 nights before the barn was chained. What did you see? He backed the HOA maintenance truck up along the fence. She swallowed. There were wooden stakes in the bed. Nathan quietly looked at the newly planted markers. Emily continued. I thought county surveyors were working late. Were they? No. Did you recognize anyone else? There were 2 contractors. Can you identify them? I think so. Deputy Moreno handed her a business card. We'll need a formal statement. Emily accepted it. I'll give one. Across the road, Tyler had been watching from outside the HOA clubhouse. The moment Emily spoke, he turned around and disappeared inside. Brooks noticed. So did Caleb. Neither of them chased him. That afternoon, Nathan requested aerial photography dating back 20 years. Within an hour, the county GIS office emailed the historical images. Deputy Mills spread the photographs across the hood of his patrol vehicle. Every fence, every tree line, every access road. Exactly where they had always been. Nathan pointed toward Caleb's barn. The fence never moved. He flipped to another year, then another, then another. The pasture never moved. Finally, he looked at the HOA map Diane had presented. Only this moved. He laid the glossy subdivision survey over the historical aerial image. The difference was unmistakable. The HOA boundary had been shifted inward to absorb part of Caleb's ranch, not by inches, by dozens of feet. Sheriff Brooks stared at the overlay. That's enough for probable cause. Nathan nodded. I'd agree. Late that evening, Brooks gathered his deputies inside the sheriff's office. We now have authentic county monuments. He checked them off one by one. Certified deeds, historical aerial imagery, witness testimony. He paused. And an unofficial survey that contradicts every one of those. Deputy Mills looked up. What's next? Brooks answered without hesitation. I want to know where that survey came from. He picked up the HOA map. If Diane Holloway didn't create this herself, he tapped the lower corner where the consulting firm's name appeared. Someone did. Across town, inside the Hollow Creek HOA office, Diane unlocked a filing cabinet after everyone else had gone home. She searched through folders with growing urgency. Invoices, board minutes, planning proposals. Then she froze. The consultant's contract was missing. Not misplaced. Gone. At almost the same moment, Tyler walked into the office. His face was pale. They found the original markers. Diane slowly closed the drawer. I know. They're talking to Emily. I know. What do we do now? For the first time since the chains had gone onto Caleb's barn, Diane didn't have an immediate answer. Miles away, Sheriff Brooks signed a request for judicial authorization. The investigation was no longer focused on a locked barn. It was now aimed squarely at the records inside the Hollow Creek HOA office. And somewhere in those files, someone had hidden the truth. The following afternoon, Sheriff Owen Brooks stood before Judge Rebecca Sloan with a thick packet of evidence: certified county deeds, historical survey records, photographs of the chained barn, GPS coordinates from the original survey monuments, Emily Carter's sworn statement, Nathan Briggs's preliminary report. Judge Sloan reviewed each page carefully before setting down her pen. "You're not asking to search the entire subdivision?" "No, Your Honor. Only the Hollow Creek HOA administrative office." Brooks nodded. "We believe records relevant to the boundary dispute are stored there." She looked over the affidavit one final time. "You've established probable cause." Her signature landed firmly at the bottom of the warrant. "Execute it professionally." "We will." An hour later, 2 marked patrol units rolled into the HOA parking lot. Residents watched from porches and sidewalks as deputies Aaron Mills and Lisa Moreno approached the office entrance beside Sheriff Brooks. Diane Holloway stepped outside before they reached the door. "I assume this is unnecessary." Brooks handed her the warrant. "No, ma'am." She scanned the first page. Her confidence didn't disappear. It simply became more controlled. "This is a homeowners association. So is the office listed on page 2. She continued reading. "You believe we've committed fraud? We're here to collect records. My attorney should be present. You're welcome to call him." Brooks checked his watch. "We'll begin once he's notified." 10 minutes later, attorney Martin Ellis arrived carrying a leather briefcase and an expression that suggested he expected another routine property disagreement. He read the warrant. Then he looked at Brooks. "What exactly are investigators searching for? Planning records? Survey correspondence? Board communications? Contracts? Anything relating to the claimed maintenance corridor?" Ellis turned toward Diane. "Those records exist?" "Of course." "They're complete?" "Naturally." He held her gaze for a moment longer before quietly saying, "Good." Deputies entered the office while every movement was recorded on body cameras. File cabinets were photographed before being opened. Computer hard drives were documented before being copied. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was improvised. Caleb remained hundreds of yards away on his ranch, watching from across the pasture. He had no intention of stepping inside the HOA office. The investigation belonged to the sheriff now, exactly as it should. Inside the records room, Deputy Moreno opened a cabinet labeled Development Expansion. Most folders contained landscaping proposals, maintenance invoices, and meeting minutes. Then she found a separate binder tucked behind a row of financial reports. Its spine carried no label. Inside were draft subdivision maps. Each newer version pushed the eastern boundary slightly farther toward Caleb's ranch. 5 feet, then 10, then 20. Finally, the barn itself appeared inside the proposed HOA property. None of the maps carried county approval. Several pages had handwritten notes. Future access. Adjust after review. Present revised version to board. Moreno looked toward Brooks. "You need to see this." At another desk, Deputy Mills searched the office computer. Hundreds of emails filled the planning folder. Most were routine. Then one subject line caught his attention. Survey revision. Final draft. He opened it. Attached was the same glossy map Diane had shown residents. Below it sat a short reply. Do not submit this version until boundary markers have been relocated. No sender name appeared, only an external consulting address. Mills printed the email immediately. Martin Ellis watched silently as the pages emerged from the printer. He frowned. Diane. She avoided his eyes. I've never seen that email. You signed the meeting minutes approving the revision. That doesn't mean I saw every attachment. Ellis picked up another document. This contract. He flipped through several pages. Where's the surveyor's state license number? Diane hesitated. I assumed the company handled that. You assumed? He read the consulting agreement again, then looked toward Brooks. May I examine this? Brooks nodded. Ellis studied the signature block carefully. His expression changed. This consultant isn't licensed in Wyoming. The room fell silent. Meanwhile, outside the building, Emily Carter sat inside her parked SUV watching everything unfold. Her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number appeared. Stay out of this. No name. No explanation. She stared at it for several seconds before taking a screenshot. Then she drove directly to the sheriff's office instead of going home. Back inside the HOA office, Deputy Moreno unlocked a storage cabinet rarely used for current records. Behind several boxes sat a digital video recorder connected to the building's security system. She checked the status lights. Still active. Still recording. Brooks looked over. Any chance it keeps audio? Moreno shrugged. Depends how it was installed. She carefully disconnected the unit and sealed it inside an evidence container. Diane immediately stepped forward. Those cameras only monitor the parking lot. We'll find out. They're not relevant. Brooks looked directly at her. If they're not relevant, he lifted the sealed evidence box. Then you have nothing to worry about. For the first time since deputies entered the building, Diane's face betrayed something unmistakable. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. And neither she nor Tyler seemed to notice that the quiet box leaving the HOA office might contain something far more damaging than altered maps or missing contracts. If the recorder had captured more than video, it might have preserved every conversation they believed no one would ever hear. The evidence recorder sat untouched inside the sheriff's digital forensics lab for less than 24 hours before technician Laura Jensen called Sheriff Owen Brooks. You should come down here. Problem? No. A brief pause. I think we found your case. Brooks arrived minutes later. Deputy Lisa Moreno was already standing beside Laura as she connected the recovered recorder to an isolated workstation. The cameras recorded continuously, Laura explained. Parking lot, lobby, conference room. She clicked another menu, and whoever installed the system enabled synchronized audio. Brooks exchanged a glance with Moreno. No one mentioned that. Laura nodded. I don't think they remembered. She selected footage from 3 nights before Caleb discovered the chains on his barn. The conference room appeared on screen. A timestamp confirmed the date. Diane Holloway sat at the head of the table reviewing subdivision maps while Tyler leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone. Their voices filled the room clearly. Tyler broke the silence first. So he's still refusing. He'll keep refusing, Diane answered. Then why keep asking? Because eventually people get tired. She tapped the map lying in front of her. Land doesn't. Tyler looked toward the highlighted section surrounding Caleb's barn. What if we just lock the building? Diane didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid the revised survey across the table. The maintenance corridor only works if everyone believes it already exists. Tyler laughed. So we make them believe it. She gave a slow nod. Exactly. Brooks folded his arms. Neither he nor Moreno spoke. Laura continued playing the recording. Tyler asked, "What happens if Caleb calls the sheriff?" Diane barely looked up from the paperwork. "He'll complain. They'll ask questions. We'll show them the map. And if he sues?" Diane's response came without hesitation. The association protects its own. She finally looked directly at her son. "Chain the barn." Tyler stared back. "You serious? Do it at night. What if someone sees me?" "They won't. And if they do?" She smiled. "They'll assume we're fixing a boundary issue." Tyler grinned. "I like that." Brooks quietly reached for the pause button. The room fell silent. Nobody needed to speculate anymore. The conversation wasn't emotional. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't taken out of context. It was deliberate. Laura looked over. "There's more." Brooks nodded. "Keep going." The recording resumed. Diane pointed toward another section of the map. "If this works," she tapped the area beyond the barn, "we can eventually extend the maintenance road through the pasture." Tyler whistled. "That's almost 20 more acres. We won't take it all at once." She spoke with the calm confidence of someone discussing landscaping plans. A few feet here, a revised easement there. People stopped noticing. Tyler laughed. Especially him. He believes paperwork matters. Diane leaned back. "Most people never read paperwork." Laura stopped the recording again. Deputy Moreno exhaled slowly. So this was never about access. Brooks answered quietly. It was always about the land. That afternoon, Brooks invited County Attorney Rachel Kim to review the footage before any public statements were made. She listened without interrupting. When the recording ended, she closed her notebook. "Preserve multiple forensic copies." "We already have." "No editing." "None." She looked directly at Brooks. "This changes everything." "In what way?" The chain itself was evidence before. She pointed toward the screen. "Now you've got evidence of intent." Word spread quickly through official channels that investigators had recovered significant digital evidence. No details were released. But inside Hollow Creek Estates, rumors traveled even faster. Tyler burst into the HOA office carrying his phone. They seized the recorder. Diane looked up sharply. "I know. It had audio." Her expression froze. For the first time since this started, genuine panic crossed her face. "You told me those microphones were disconnected." "I thought they were." "You thought?" Tyler's voice cracked. "You told me to chain the barn in that room." Diane stood abruptly. "Lower your voice." "It recorded everything, didn't it?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, Emily Carter arrived at the sheriff's office to sign her formal witness statement. As she finished, Deputy Moreno slid her phone across the desk. "The text message you received?" Emily nodded. "I never answered." "You did the right thing." Brooks entered holding another folder. "You're not the only one speaking now." Emily looked confused. "What do you mean?" Brooks opened the folder. Inside were 6 newly filed witness interview requests. Residents who had remained silent for years were suddenly calling the sheriff's office. One reported landscaping equipment that disappeared during an HOA dispute. Another described boundary stakes appearing overnight near his back fence. A retired couple wanted to discuss an old easement disagreement that had never made sense. Brooks looked out the office window toward the lights of Hollow Creek Estates. The recording gave people something they haven't had in a long time. Emily followed his gaze. "What?" "Permission to stop being afraid." By sunrise, investigators no longer believed they were examining a single unlawful act involving one locked barn. They were beginning to uncover a pattern, and every new witness seemed ready to pull another thread from the same carefully woven story. By the end of the week, the sheriff's conference room was no longer filled with investigators. It was filled with homeowners. One after another, residents who had spent years avoiding conflict finally agreed to give sworn statements. A retired couple described being pressured to move a backyard fence after receiving letters that cited HOA maps instead of county records. Another homeowner produced photographs showing orange survey stakes appearing overnight along his property before quietly disappearing a month later. A landscaping contractor admitted he had been hired several times to remove old boundary markers without ever being told they were official county monuments. Every statement alone raised questions. Together, they revealed a disturbing pattern. Sheriff Owen Brooks spread the interviews across the conference table. This stopped being Caleb's case days ago. County Attorney Rachel Kim nodded. Now it's about whether the HOA knowingly misrepresented property boundaries. Deputy Lisa Moreno added another folder. We've also finished tracing the consulting payments. Rachel opened the financial records. Several invoices had been approved by the HOA board. But one series of payments stood apart. 3 transfers had been authorized directly by Diane Holloway without a recorded board vote. Each payment went to the same consulting company that produced the unapproved boundary maps. How much? Brooks asked. Nearly $87,000. Were the residents informed? Rachel shook her head. I can't find any disclosure. Deputy Aaron Mills slid another document across the table. The company's state registration expired almost 2 years ago. Brooks leaned back slowly. So the HOA paid an unlicensed consultant to prepare unofficial maps, then presented those maps as though they carried county authority. No wonder residents believed them. Across the subdivision, whispers had turned into open conversations. Neighbors gathered outside mailboxes instead of avoiding one another. People compared old violation notices. Several realized they had received nearly identical letters referencing maintenance corridors that never appeared on county plats. Emily Carter watched as conversations that once happened behind closed doors unfolded in broad daylight. One elderly resident approached her. You were the first one to speak. Emily smiled faintly. I was just the first one who finally did. The woman nodded. I should have years ago. Inside the HOA office, the atmosphere had completely changed. Board member Martin Ellis sat silently reviewing financial ledgers. Every page created another question. Every missing approval signature created another problem. He looked toward Diane. Why weren't these consultant payments voted on? They were urgent. That's not an answer. They were within my authority. Martin flipped to another invoice. This one authorizes revised boundary planning. I know what it authorizes. He looked directly at her. Did the board ever approve moving property lines? No. Did we ever vote to present unofficial surveys as official? Diane crossed her arms. You're overreacting. Martin slowly closed the ledger. No. His voice remained calm. I don't think I am. For the first time since joining the board, he wondered whether he had spent years defending decisions he never fully understood. That evening, local reporters gathered outside the county administration building after learning a public hearing had been scheduled. Sheriff Brooks refused to discuss evidence. County Attorney Kim offered only a brief statement. The matter will be addressed through the legal process. No accusations, no dramatic announcements, just procedure. Caleb watched the news coverage from his kitchen. His barn remained chained. His tractor still sat inside. Yet for the first time since the conflict began, he realized the chains no longer represented control. They represented evidence, and every additional day they remained untouched strengthened the case. Later that night, Tyler paced nervously inside Diane's office. "We have to explain the recording. We will. We have to explain the maps. We will. We have to explain the money." Diane didn't answer. Tyler slammed both hands onto the desk. "They're building a fraud case. They're building a property case," she corrected. "Not if those financial records connect everything." She looked toward the dark window overlooking the subdivision. For years, she had believed confidence alone could outlast questions. Now every answer investigators uncovered generated 3 more. Her phone rang. She answered immediately. After only a few seconds, the color drained from her face. When the call ended, Tyler stared at her. "What now?" She lowered the phone slowly. The county moved the hearing forward. "When?" "Monday morning." Tyler swallowed. "That's only 3 days." "I know." The weekend passed with surprising silence. No new HOA notices appeared. No additional survey stakes were planted. No one touched the chains on Caleb's barn. Instead, deputies finalized reports, surveyors completed certified measurements, financial investigators organized payment records, and witness statements were notarized. By Sunday evening, Sheriff Brooks placed every document into a single evidence binder. Across the front, one label summarized weeks of investigation: Hollow Creek Estates Property Boundary Investigation. He closed the binder and looked toward County Attorney Rachel Kim. "Ready?" She nodded. "We've got deeds, surveys, witnesses, financial records, and intent." Brooks picked up the binder. Then on Monday, "We let the facts speak." The hearing would determine far more than who owned one barn. It would decide whether years of intimidation had been built on paperwork that was never lawful in the first place. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, every seat inside the county hearing room was filled. Homeowners from Hollow Creek Estates sat beside ranchers from neighboring properties. Reporters lined the back wall. Sheriff Owen Brooks, County Surveyor Nathan Briggs, County Attorney Rachel Kim, and Caleb Foster occupied one side of the room. Across from them sat Diane Holloway, Tyler Holloway, and Attorney Martin Ellis. Judge Rebecca Sloan entered. The room stood. Once everyone was seated, she spoke without raising her voice. "This hearing concerns a disputed property boundary, alleged misrepresentation of survey documents, and related evidence. We will proceed with facts." Rachel Kim stood first. "The county's position is straightforward." She handed certified copies of Caleb's deed to the court. The original deed. Then the archived county survey. The recorded survey. Finally, Nathan Briggs's certified measurements, and the current field verification. Judge Sloan compared all 3 documents. "The legal descriptions are consistent." "They are, Your Honor." Rachel nodded toward Nathan. "The original monuments remain in their recorded locations." Nathan approached the witness stand. Using enlarged aerial photographs and survey diagrams, he explained every measurement. The iron monuments referenced in the Foster deed still exist. He displayed photographs taken during the investigation. They align with every certified county record. Then he pointed to the HOA survey. "This document ignores those monuments entirely." Judge Sloan looked over her glasses. "Could this difference result from an honest surveying error?" Nathan answered immediately. "No." "Why not?" "Because a licensed surveyor cannot legally disregard existing county monuments." He paused. "The only way to produce this boundary is to intentionally create a different one." Silence settled over the courtroom. Rachel introduced the next exhibit. Historical aerial photographs covering 20 years. Fence lines, roads, the barn. Nothing had moved. Only the HOA map had. Judge Sloan made several notes before looking toward Diane's table. "Your response?" Martin Ellis slowly rose. For several seconds he remained silent. Then he surprised everyone. Your Honor, my client retained me after this dispute began. He glanced briefly toward Diane. After reviewing the county's evidence, I cannot dispute ownership of Mr. Foster's barn. The courtroom stirred. Diane stared at him. Martin, he continued. The deed, surveys, GPS verification, and historical imagery establish that the barn has always remained on Mr. Foster's property. Judge Sloan nodded once. So ownership is no longer disputed? Not by counsel. Tyler lowered his head. Diane remained motionless. Rachel Kim approached the evidence table again. Ownership is only part of this matter. She placed a transcript beside the judge. The county also recovered authenticated audio recordings. Judge Sloan reviewed the chain of custody certification. Admissible. Laura Jensen summarized the forensic recovery process. No edits, no missing segments, original timestamps intact. Rachel then played the recording. The room heard Diane's voice. Chain the barn. Moments later came another sentence. We won't take it all at once. A few feet here, a revised easement there. People stopped noticing. No one spoke after the recording ended. Judge Sloan slowly removed her glasses. She looked directly at Diane. Did you make these statements? Diane hesitated. My comments were taken out of context. Rachel calmly replied. The complete recording has already been submitted. Judge Sloan looked toward Martin Ellis. Counsel? Ellis closed his folder. I have no basis to challenge its authenticity. The judge nodded. Very well. Rachel presented one final group of exhibits. Financial records, consulting invoices, unapproved payments, the consultant's expired state registration, the missing board approvals. Martin quietly reviewed the documents one last time. Then he stood. Your Honor. He took a slow breath. Effective immediately, I withdraw as legal counsel for the Hollow Creek HOA in this matter. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Sloan restored order with a single tap of her gavel. Reason. I cannot continue representing positions contradicted by verified evidence. He collected his briefcase. Before leaving, he looked toward Diane. You should have told the board the truth. He walked out without another word. Judge Sloan allowed the silence to linger. Finally, she delivered her findings. The county records establish beyond dispute that the Foster property boundaries were never altered. The HOA possessed no legal authority to chain the barn or claim ownership. She looked toward Sheriff Brooks. I further find sufficient evidence to justify expanded investigation into possible fraud, false representations, misuse of association funds, and related offenses. Brooks nodded. It will begin immediately. The judge turned to Caleb. Mr. Foster, you'll regain unrestricted access to your property. Then she faced Diane. This hearing ends the property dispute. She paused. It does not end the investigation. As deputies approached to collect additional evidence, Diane remained seated, staring at the same maps that had once given her complete confidence. They now carried no authority at all, only questions. And every answer investigators uncovered would determine not just who had chained one barn, but who would ultimately pay for years of carefully planned deception. The morning after the hearing, Sheriff Owen Brooks drove on to Caleb Foster's ranch with deputies Aaron Mills and Lisa Moreno. The evidence photographs had been completed. The measurements were certified. The hearing was over. Brooks held up a pair of bolt cutters. Ready? Caleb nodded once. Go ahead. With 2 clean cuts, the chain dropped onto the gravel. Nobody cheered. Nobody applauded. Deputy Moreno photographed the lock where it lay before placing it into an evidence bag. It'll stay with the case, she said. Caleb wrapped his hand around the barn door and pulled. The hinges creaked exactly as they always had. Inside, his tractor sat untouched. Dust covered the hood, but nothing had been damaged. Caleb climbed into the driver's seat. The engine turned twice before roaring to life. The familiar sound rolled across the pasture. Several neighbors standing near the fence smiled, not because a tractor had started, because something far more important had. The truth had finally moved. Later that afternoon, the Hollow Creek HOA held an emergency board meeting. Only 4 board members attended. Martin Ellis returned briefly, not as legal counsel, but to submit his resignation from the board. "I should have asked harder questions," he admitted. "I didn't." He placed his written resignation on the table. "I won't make that mistake again." Another board member followed him, then another. Within 30 minutes, Diane Holloway no longer had enough voting members present to conduct official business. The meeting adjourned without a single motion passing. Outside, homeowners quietly gathered in the parking lot. For years they had assumed challenging the board was impossible. Now they understood something different. The board had only seemed powerful because nobody had demanded proof. During the following weeks, county investigators completed their financial review. The consultant responsible for the unofficial survey was referred to state licensing authorities after investigators confirmed the company had operated without a valid registration. The county also concluded that several HOA expenditures had been approved outside the association's required procedures. Separate civil proceedings were recommended to address those financial disputes, while property records were formally corrected to remove any references to the unapproved boundary revisions. Every affected homeowner received certified notice confirming that county deeds, not unofficial HOA maps, controlled their property boundaries. Tyler Holloway accepted a negotiated resolution through the court process after acknowledging his role in placing the chain and unauthorized survey stakes. He agreed to cooperate with investigators and perform community service as part of the resolution approved by the court. Diane faced multiple civil claims from homeowners seeking reimbursement for costs connected to the unauthorized boundary actions. The county's expanded investigation into financial matters continued separately. One Saturday morning, Emily Carter walked across the pasture carrying a small box. "I figured these belonged to you." Inside were the photographs she had taken of Tyler unloading the wooden stakes before everything began. Caleb looked through them carefully. "They helped." Emily smiled. "I almost deleted them." "I'm glad you didn't." She looked toward the restored fence line. "I kept thinking one person couldn't change anything." Caleb closed the box. One honest person usually starts with one honest decision. A month later, new county-certified survey markers replaced the disturbed boundary points. Nathan Briggs supervised the installation personally. When the final monument was set, he handed Caleb the updated certification. "You won't have this argument again." Caleb laughed softly. "I hope nobody else does either." Nathan looked toward the subdivision. "They might, but next time they'll know where to look first. The county records, and the ground." As summer settled over the valley, Caleb finally drove his tractor through the same barn doors that had once been chained shut. He crossed the pasture at an easy pace, passing the original iron monument that had never moved despite every attempt to rewrite the map around it. The fence stood exactly where it always had. Not because someone won an argument, because the facts never changed, only the story people chose to believe. Before heading back toward the barn, Caleb stopped beside the old survey marker. His grandfather's leather folder rested inside the truck exactly where it had been on the first day. He smiled at the faded handwriting across the front. "Land deeds, never throw away." His grandfather had been right. A chain can lock a barn. A false map can confuse a neighborhood. An HOA can overstep its authority. But none of those things can erase the truth written into a lawful deed and proven by honest evidence. In the end, it wasn't anger that reopened Caleb's barn. It was patience. It was procedure. And it was the simple decision to let the facts speak louder than anyone ever could.
If there's one lesson I hope stay with you after this story, it's that the strongest position isn't always the loudest one. Caleb never won because he argued harder or lost his temper. He won because he kept the original records, respected the law process, and trusted that the truth could stand on its own. That's a lesson worth remembering whether you're dealing with property, family, neighbors, or any challenging life puts in front of you. Patience doesn't always feel powerful in the moment, but when it's backed by honesty and solid evidence, it has a way of lasting for longer than intimidation ever can. Stories like this remind us that real strength isn't about getting even, it's about protecting what's matters, treating people with dignity, and standing your ground without giving up your integrity. Sometimes just a bright quiet, one document, one witness, and one honest decision at a time. Those victories may not make the most noise, but they often leave the deepest mark. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you believe Caleb handled this the right way, type yes in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where staying calm makes all the difference, share your story below. I read your comments and they inspire many of the stories we tell here. If you enjoy stories about quiet courage, standing up for what's right, and protecting the values that matter, I'd be honored if you subscribe and join us for the next one. Until then, take care of yourself and thanks for your watching.